All right, we are now recording. This is the class that's going to be, again, posted on the channel for Valorant, on the FITGMR channel. Okay, so I already mentioned, if you have any questions, just feel free to drop into the Val training chat. So we're going to be talking about entry roles. Okay, entry roles are an essential role in Valorant. They've been pretty much just designed into a particular category, and that's duelists. We're going to be doing a lot of talks on duelists. We will have a particular slide on what if you're not a duelist and you just want to entry because your team isn't doing it for you, right? Stuff like that. We will have some conversations about that, but this is mostly for players that want to get better at it. I'm going to be using Jett as the main example, but there's going to be a lot of examples that we can kind of convert onto other characters, okay? So with that out of the way, does anyone have any questions in regards to what we're going to do? One last time. Any questions? None. Let's get started. Okay. First things first, we're going to be covering things to understand the role. There's two types of entry. We're going to talk about that in just a sec. We're going to talk about the support that you need in order to be able to be a proper entry. Some people just think that you can just walk in and that's it. I'm sure that there's some people that they are just that person, that guy. That is a thing, but unfortunately, it is not consistent. It's not going to get you anywhere. We got to make sure that we have some structure, okay? And that's where support comes in. We're going to be talking about entering, again, when you don't have a duelist with you. Maybe they died, something like that. We're going to be looking at entering as a whole, and this is where I'm going to be giving you guys the tips that you need to be a proper duelist or a proper entry, okay? We're going to be looking a little bit at pathing. We're going to be looking a little bit at countering that entry in case you're playing on defense, so you can understand the entry role a little bit more in depth, even if you're not entering yourself. And of course, sequencing and spacing. This is actually something that was talked about on the channel. I think about a week ago, someone asked the question, what happens if I'm trying to entry? How do I keep that spacing between me and my teammates? That's actually going to be covered here. Okay, so let's get started. So first things first, types of entry. There are two types of entry. Okay, the first one is hard entry and the second one is soft entry. You can change the name the way that you like it, but this is generally the two main roles. We have entry fraggers that can just take space, just basically get in there, take it by force, because that's their main strength. And then there's characters that require a little bit of assistance. They're pretty much the characters that will be making a play behind the main hard entry. And they're the ones that usually get the trade. They're the ones that tend to pop off the most. So if we have an example between these two, it could be something like Raze, Jett versus Arena or Phoenix, okay? Both of these two are equally as important. However, you're going to find that against some comps, one might be better than the other. So if you have you have a team that's really good at making a stronghold by the choke, you might have a really easy time just breaking through by being a Jett. Or maybe they have a really, really strong setup with Cypher that's not letting you run in, then you might need to take a slower approach. This is where Arena might come in handy. You can flash, you can clear everything as you're going around corners, and then you can keep going from there, right? It is important to understand that the entry fragger is essential because you need to be able to enter the objective, whether it is a retake or not. And you need to make sure that when you're entering that area, it is not just about getting that first kill. It is about getting information. We're going to cover that in just a moment when I show you guys what happens when a Jett dashes in. The information aspect that you get from taking sight is just as essential as that first frag. So even if you don't get it, if your spacing is right, you're going to be able to take that space just fine, even if it wasn't you getting the kill. Okay, remember, it's okay to die. It's okay to have 16 something first deaths. What was Demon 1 stat? Okay, but as long as your team is able to make something of it, you'll be fine. Okay, make sure you're paying attention to how much space you're making and how you're using that information. Okay, so very often I see players that are too impatient in taking fights or waiting for the right piece of utility. I noticed that most of the time, this is where diamonds tend to hit their last wall before trying to hit Ascendant or even Immortal. They tend to not look at their own utility, okay? Entry cannot be done alone. Even if you know that a Smurf can easily walk in and get kills, it is actually too much for them to do at the end of the day. They need to give them multiple one-on-ones instead of being able to just kind of do it all at once in order for this to work. Look at your team. Look at what they're capable of. So for example, if we look at this low-res screenshot I took, you can look at things like Omen. He has a flash. He can provide a flash for you. You can look at KJ. They have turret. They can give you a little bit of information before dashing in or before flashing in. They have mollies. I don't cover that in this little blurb, but They have mollies. They can cover a little piece of an area instead of someone just swinging you. There's someone like Dart or Drone from Sova, right? So it's stuff like that that you can look at. And inversely, when you're countering that utility, pay attention to what the enemy can counter with. Do they have a dart that they can shoot at you while you're entering? Do they have a cipher setup? Do they have anything to retaliate? I find that players do not plan this ahead of time, and they do the exact same entry time and time again, and they don't know why it works or they don't know why it doesn't. It's important to pay attention to how the enemy team is retaliating. Okay, so pay attention to your team and kind of identify what works for you. Okay, you don't have to be like an IGL, okay, or a shot caller to make these decisions for your team, but you should be asking for utility. And this is where I find the last little bit. Again, this is where players that tend to be diamond, trying to break into a center or ascend into a world, this is where I find them take the biggest hit. It is that they're not really asking for utility. They don't want to ask for that flash. They don't want to ask for that dart. Okay. And if you, let's say, for example, you're not a duelist player, but you're someone that's an initiator, you're a controller, you can actually tell your teammate, you can encourage them to take the site by telling them, I have X utility for you. You can take this. Okay. So this is where you can look at that stuff. This is how you can get into site. Okay. So now let's talk a little bit about entering without a duelist. We need to kind of pay attention to the utility that you have and the type of entry that you're capable of when you're not a duelist. So we talked about hard and soft. When you are not a duelist, you can still be part of that hard entry and soft entry. It's just a little bit more difficult for you to get that done. Most of the time when you're not a duelist, all of the utility that you have will kind of be more on the softer side, right? It won't be as direct. It won't be as hard. But what you can do is just pay attention to what you have and see how you can work with it. So for example, if we're looking at something like Breach is a really good example of a character that can enable entry, a character that can enable a really good flash with a KJ that really doesn't have that much utility for entry, but she can benefit from the flash. Maybe she's out of utility. Maybe all of her utility died during another entry and they had to rotate back and forth. Well, a flash is good enough for these two to be able to take that site together, right? Maybe you have something like a fade. Maybe the fade, you can use both of your prowlers and you can use them to kind of take as much information as you can. Okay. And you can use them together in order to be able to push space a little bit more confidently, right? You can look at characters like Cypher or Sage, characters that can create a single lane or a single choke point that they can control. You can look at this as examples with Fastlane from from Neon, right? You can look at these things. You can look at how both of these two work together in order to take space. And again, they can't do it alone. If you have to do it by yourself, that kind of sucks. I'm just going to tell you this right off the bat. It is not going to be as successful. The only reason it will be successful is if they screw up, because this is a last resort or method that you have to use. You can use these little methods right here that you see on screen. There's plenty more examples, but you can use these when you're out of options or if your duelists aren't doing anything, but you know that you can help someone. Hey, KJ, you used everything. Can you use your flashes? I'm going to entry. Okay, that's something I did a lot as KJ. I was trying to learn KJ a while back, long time ago, and this is how I did. I realized that entry was my strong point and my teammate wasn't doing it for me on attack, and I just decided to use this as an example of going in, right? This is something you can do. It's of course not ideal, but it's something you can do in your games to kind of make still that splash, that impact. Okay. So someone had a question. What if I'm a duelist trying to entry and you're asking for support for my team, but they won't use any utility or help? This is when I tell players that if they're not playing at your speed, you kind of have to slow it down. It is not ideal, but waiting is the best game that you can play, even if it's not the most fun, because what's going to happen is when you are giving a lot of space for free, players tend to be either really impatient on the opposite side and they might swing, or they tend to be really unreliable in terms of how they're going to be communicating with their team. So a good example is, let's say that you are playing with Jet and you're playing back here, you're playing on A main. They could swing. They could send out some utility. They don't coordinate it. It's just wasted, right? You're still getting impact from your character, even though you're not fully entering. Again, it's not perfect. It's not the perfect scenario, but you're still getting something done. Some games are just dead ends, okay? But as long as you keep a positive mindset on what exactly you're doing, I'm still taking out utility. I'm still getting picks. I'm still taking space for my team. Then you're still doing everything you can do. Not all games are winnable, okay? But as long as you keep that mindset, you should be able to still take that in a positive mindset. Okay. Let's see. Someone mentioned as well, you can just play for yourself, right? You can just get kills. Of course, that's something that you can do. Like I mentioned, you can get picks. Okay. Try to get a positive spin on where you are at. Most of the time, players will respond if you are doing something that they believe is the ideal way to play it. So let's say you're getting picks, even though you're not fully entering, you're still getting picks. They'll be like, well, this guy's still fragging. He's top fragging. Maybe I can help him out. You can slowly gain their trust just by playing. Again, not ideal, but it's something that you can do to improve on maybe your team synergy. And this is why I tell players that if you're having a hard time, maybe try to learn to be more of an IGL, get everyone involved, ask them questions, and maybe they'll feel a little bit more in control of the situation, because usually they do that because they're not really engaged. So maybe you can keep them awake, you know? Does anyone have any other questions that I can kind of throw in there before we move on entry? Okay, let's move on to the next one. So now let's look at entering. So we looked at, you know, understanding the role, understanding how you can use it. Now let's look at entering. Okay, sequencing has a lot of different meanings. Depending on the context, I'm going to be looking at 2 different meanings within the same space. We're looking at it entering. Okay, we will look at 2 different ways that sequencing can work. So the first one is numbering. Numbering is something that we use in team settings to kind of identify who goes in first, then who goes in second, third, you name it. Okay. Entry fraggers are usually the first person to go in. And when you're paying attention to what angle you're going to be taking, you have to make sure that your team is playing either an angle that can support you or an angle that's not the same one as you. Because if both of you are going in at the same pace and at the same angle, looking at the same thing and having the same objective, you guys are both going to get tapped. It's very easy for that to happen. It happens a lot, even in the higher elos. I see it. I was doing this. You were in my space, or I'm trying to entry and you're blocking me, right? Happens a lot. Okay. So the first one is, again, looking at that number of entry. So in order for you to be able to identify and make it easier for yourself, you need to kind of call who is taking what. So we're going to be looking to on this first example right here. Okay. The number of entry is, number 1 is going to be Jet, number 2 is going to be KO, and number 3 is going to be Omen. As you can see, first right off the bat, we have Jet dashing in, taking this space, and while this is happening, we have KO that's watching his lane, while this guy is probably setting down a smoke. As Jet is still in the smoke, KO can come in, he can clear the left side or the right, who knows, while the third player can watch that same angle. Notice how they basically transition from one person taking in and the other person staying back there helping them out. As that happens, the next player can essentially take a little bit more space. The other guy knows that he wants to take this switch, and then the last player can plant. Okay? Why would KO enter before Omen? Initiators are usually pretty strong second frags. They're usually pretty strong at entering with the team, and they usually have some sort of kit that allows them to take that space. So, for example, KO has a flash, and he can essentially follow up the Jet in this scenario. Okay, so, yep. So when you're looking at this, you can see that the sequence was pretty simple. We have number 1, we have Jet entering in, and then we can see how these positions right here can kind of help one another. I see this not being fully fulfilled, I will say, in disorganized teams or in teams that just people are just not getting it. Okay. So a player will make a move and then their entire team will follow and they won't take any extra space. So without sequencing, a good example of things that might cause you a headache is, for example, in this first slide, the Jet might not be able to dash in because KO is first. So the numbering would be number 1 KO, number 2 Jet. Jet can't dash in because she's being blocked. She doesn't have the space. She doesn't have the leeway to be able to take that space, right? That's one example of how bad sequencing can lead to headaches. Number 2, let's say, for example, over here, maybe this guy over here is looking at tree and this guy's looking up there. Well, an example might be both of these two might be clearing the same angle, right? Both Omen and KO can watch both tree or this double stack area over there, right? They can look at the same thing and it might lead to some bad place. So no one's taking anything. Maybe another example is everyone pushes up. Maybe KO isn't watching over here by switch. He's also up here. Well, this entire backside has now been exposed. Now there's no trades, right? This is how numbering and sequencing can help with taking space and controlling that space. But when you're playing that entry, you got to make sure that you know who's behind you. So in this scenario, I'd be paying attention to KO. And then if I was KO, I'd be paying attention to this guy coming in and then someone back there. I feel like because I'm in lower elo, I dropped to S2 and I play with higher goals. Not too many people have mics and don't really help on entry. How can I work on this? So if we go back, this is where this kind of comes in. Try to see what you can do to just make your own impact. Okay. Now we talked about it just a moment ago. You can do things like, again, look for picks. If you feel like you are mechanically capable enough to hold out on your own, look for picks. In lower elos, it's a really big mechanics check. And this is why everyone's like, oh, just pick Jett and Reyna. If you get frags, people will become more confident. There's less things for them to watch out for. But if you like playing a more supportive role, you can do things like this, where you can be the source of, you can be the anchor for your team to kind of fall back. I'm going to give you guys this wall. Go in. And if it goes wrong, it goes wrong. But at least you're doing your part. And that's why it's a team game. Of course, you can still get an ace. You can still get multiple kills. But at the end of the day, it's a team game, right? But again, look for different ways that you can kind of make that impact on your own way. And I can kind of develop more on that in the future. It can be just low elo specific. Let's look at number 2. So I talked about sequencing in 2 aspects. The second one is chaining utility. Now I call it cascading utility. It's sort of a domino effect that you're using to go from one place to the next. Now I use 2 different examples over here. You're going to see that when you're cascading this utility, when you're sequencing this utility, you're going to notice that there's a lot of different utility that can be used at once. So in example number 1, we can see that Omen is initially throwing that smoke, okay, which allows the KO to then throw this the knife over here, giving information to the Jett for them to dash in. You can see how each piece of utility allows them to be stronger in the next piece of utility. So the little smoke over here allows this guy to be able to properly swing and even be able to throw that knife. And then after that, this right here allows the Jett to be fully confident in knowing how many people are in this area of sight, right? This is just pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Let's look at another example. You can see that the number sequencing is now different. You can see that now we have smoke, then we have something like a flash, which can then be followed up with something like Jett dash. Jett dash into an updraft maybe on top of generator, which can then be followed up with a flash right behind her, which allows them to be able to chain one onto the next. Does anyone have any questions in regards to this? Does anyone have any questions in regards to why it was sequenced like this, maybe? But this is just an example of how one piece of utility chains onto the next, allowing each piece of utility to be better. Okay, no questions. I feel like someone's typing there. I'm going to let them type. While that's happening, let's look at one piece that I showed in the earlier slide with sequencing and spacing. Does anyone see a problem with the way that this was done in terms of chaining that utility? Because this was just me showing entry, but do you see a problem? We can just see that they're doing the right thing. They're doing the right numbering of who enters, who goes in, who goes next. But do you see a problem with the utility? Where would Flash go? Where would Omen Flash go? Omen Flash isn't even out. Omen Smoke isn't even out. Does anyone else see anything else?
Omen Smoke not being out there is gonna force your Jett to put her smoke up there.
Yep.
Which is gonna make it take a lot longer to do entry.
Exactly. So we run out of
Which
options as an
in
entry
turn
ourselves. Sorry, I cut you
creates
off.
that which in turn is gonna create that domino effect to where then Omen can't paranoia up top, but KO also can't knife safely.
Yeah, that was really good. Yeah, I agree. If you have a player that is essentially trying to do multiple roles at once, everybody else is going to stumble. Very similarly to what we saw over here. If these two over here are basically looking at the same angle, it could lead to both of them getting collided. That happens. Did Jett go too early? Maybe. Yeah, maybe. They could have gone too early. They couldn't wait for smokes. They didn't call out for anything. They just went in. There's a lot of things that went wrong here. Even though the spacing was right, even though the Jett was right, notice how they didn't wait for the right pieces of utility to cascade off of. It doesn't give your team plenty of options to work off of you if you do this. And this is why I put that there. I need you guys to also notice that even though you can have strong positioning, you can still have wrong sequencing in your utility, which leads to bad entry. Okay. Now let's talk about pathing. Pathing is where things get a little rough for players, I'll say. Okay. I need you guys to kind of look at pathing as the path you're going to take from point A to point B. It's not just me getting over here to here, right? It's how do I get there in the first place? When you're playing someone like an entry, you need to kind of understand your role. When you're playing a hard entry, someone that can take a lot of space, your pathing usually revolves in taking backside as fast as possible or getting as much space as possible. So when you're playing this character, you're going to realize that it's really easy to counter because your options can be very limited. Okay. Sometimes you might go left, you might go right. It can be very easy to counter. However, I find that players that struggle the most only do the same thing over and over again. So, for example, we can see that the Jet always dashes forward, right? Really easy to counter. Maybe drop a bunch of mollies there, maybe put a trip there, right? Really easy to counter. Okay. In order for you to be an effective entry, you got to make sure that you have at least 2 to 3 different ways of entering at the beginning and then pathing yourself up to a different point. So for example, this entry right here can be for her to take this spot on the map, this back gen area. And then maybe this one over here is for them to take this top jump up box over here by heaven. You can maybe have the one that I showed that leads to hell, but each one of them needs to lead somewhere else, and you got to make sure that you have the utility for it. You're going to realize that for her to take this spot, she uses up her updraft, whereas over here she doesn't. Maybe she can use it to take this space over here. Look at your options. Make sure that you're not entering the same way twice. I know that you can do the same thing until it doesn't work. That is one way to look at it. Or you can have a different option each time and switch it up a little bit. It can be just as simple as the angle you're going to take. It can be as long as you stay up. How long you stay in the smoke. You can stay here at the beginning, maybe 1 second and then swing out, or maybe you double smoke yourself and then you go out, right? Maybe with satchels, you can satchel your way up here, maybe up here, maybe up here. Maybe you have a shotgun in one of those. I know Chaos is a really good example of using that shotgun, right? We can use different pathing, different entryways that can help your team strategize around you, okay? Make sure you let them know, however. It is important for you to let them know. Now, with all that is said and done, we're going to look at just one example in just a second. Countering entry. Since you understand how entry works now in a lot of different ways, when you're playing the game, it is important for you guys to look at how the enemy team gets into sight. Okay. When you look at the enemy team and who goes into sight first and what utility they're using, you can start paying attention to the sequencing. You can start paying attention to how they're using that utility, how they're cascading that utility. It allows you to create better plays. It is important for you guys not only to identify how they're doing this, but what their action trigger is. Their action trigger could be something as simple as a smoke. It could be a dash. It could be a not a flash. It could be a dart. It could be any of these things. So an action trigger, for any of you that are still confused, is what is the piece of utility that's initiating the push? Okay. What is the piece of utility that you know means entry for the enemy team? A dart doesn't have to mean entry, right? A smoke doesn't have to mean entry, but maybe the dash is. Maybe the dash is in and that's a fake, but the flash is a really good initiating action trigger. Maybe double smoke is all they really need. Pay attention to what it is that they're using. Okay, make sure you have a plan, and make sure you're paying attention to how they basically combine their utility at the end of the day. We're gonna look at one example real quick of how this kind of works out. Let's see if I can switch my screen really quickly. Hopefully I can do this really quickly. Okay, change my screen. So I'm going to show you guys an example from a one-on-one that I did pretty recently with our coaching one-on-one service. And this is the way that it worked. We had a Jet that was pretty good at basically swinging right here at the start and then getting a pick. Okay. Not only were they really good at getting this pick, they were also really good at being able to jump.
The wrong thing.
Is it not working?
No, I don't
You're
think
just
we
screen
see
sharing Canva, homie.
No. But I have it up. Oh, it's because I switched sides. My bad, guys.
Nice woods ping, by the way. Tab.
Ah, yes. I love Tarkov. Anyways, so can you guys see the screen?
Yes.
Perfect. Let's try again. So I had a player, right? This is on Breeze. Don't actually ask about their setup. Don't ask about why the setup was like this. Clove was out, so the character that they decided to go for is Clove instead of Viper. So their setup was really bad on defense. However, they were able to use it just fine because they were able to counter that entry. Okay, so what happened was they were kind of paying attention to how many times they could get this pick right here. Most of the time, they didn't really get a chance to get the kill. It was just a mechanics check for them. They couldn't get it. They realized that this is something they need to do. They were able to jump peek around here. They were able to understand how many players were around this area, right? But at the end of the day, regardless of what they did for information, they were able to get themselves prepared for phase 2. They knew that the second that this wall was up, they knew that they basically had all of this space for free. Their Clove was really good at basically controlling the sightlines, and what they did is they put a smoke right there. So in case that they wanted to play around here, they had this space to work with. However, the problem that this student kind of had a big kind of oh no moment with was that they believed that in order for them to counter entry, they needed to jump the opponent. And the way that they decided to do it is they decided to go and wait into smoke in case for one of them to jump in. And if none of them jumped in, they decided to peek out, potentially getting any of them entering around this spot. Surely now you can kind of see that there's a big mistake with all of this. Number one, they used their dash at the beginning, so they have no dash.
Yeah.
Number two,
he has no dash if it goes wrong. But number 2, he can't see through that smoke. So if he doesn't have anyone pushing into that smoke, he could have everyone alive all pushing from the same spot.
and that's
And
exactly what
he'd be
happened.
getting dunked by all 3 people.
That is exactly what happened. So it took him 3 times of me telling him, make sure that you have a backup plan when you don't have a dash, for him to realize, oh wait, I can't just jump him, right? Basically, it was one of those things where a player was really stubborn in how exactly it is that they make something work, right? And we can have different plays of that. We can have someone like the Sky, for example, on their enemy team who believed that this was the flash and this is the play that they had to make, right? This was their entry point, but every single time they would completely ignore what was going on mid. They had no one mid, right? So with that in mind, it is important for you to understand what your backup plan is. And I'm going to have a class on backup plans. I'm actually going to create a flow chart for you guys that you guys can kind of, I was going to say print out like this is a class, but you can use it basically in case you want to kind of pay attention to how you can kind of look at this flow chart. So for example, I use dash early. I'm playing a really aggressive no frills angle. Can I get out? No, right? So I should be able to instead reposition and look for better entry points. For example, when I told them, hey, make sure to call for your Sova, they're like, okay, they started calling for their Sova for a dart here. They were able to get a lot of kills through the wall. They were able to get their knives really early, and they were able to play around this area and get more kills, right? Stuff like that is what made them shine a little bit more, just knowing what exactly it is that they have available to them. Something as simple as utility, right? Simple as understanding that to counter entry, their big entry point right now was using this wall. This was the big thing that was telling them that they can split sight, because now its sight is in 2 positions, and they're like, okay, we can now swing this. Well, wrong. You don't have dash, right? So I'm maybe rambling at this point, but the point is, right, I want to make sure that you're paying attention to what you have on your kit, paying attention to what the enemy team has on their kit, and looking at what exactly it is that helps you counter that entry. Okay. And in his position, it was, we didn't have any utility for stall. We can actually just wait back and counter those players that wanted to push up, like the Sky and like the Jet that pushed up here that I didn't mention. Okay. So that's the example. Does anyone have any questions? Now we're about to close this off. Okay. We're about to start our scrim. Does anyone have any questions before we go?
So when it comes to like splitting sites, say you don't have a Viper wall, how would you want to go about entering on that? So like, because then you don't have a way to sit there and just smoke off an area, and you have that wall to also block you off.
Yep. I mean, you have a
So,
couple options. Do you have a smoke in this scenario or no? No smoke,
so
right?
like saying you have a smoke, but you don't have any sort of wall.
Okay. So the way that I tell players to kind of work around that, and I meant if you had a controller, but the way that I tell players to kind of work around it is, let's say you have a controller, pay attention to the main traffic points, right? Close these off. It might help you out. But let's say you don't have a controller and you don't have a way to split sight. The only way to kind of work around that idea is to, again, what I mentioned, if you don't have a way to entry, right, try to do what you can do. There's a lot of really popular spots that the enemy team hangs around, and you can look at those positions to try to see if you can get a kill. So, for example, they might hang out here, here, they might hang out around this area, they might hang out back here, right? Kind of start taking notes on where you can
Yeah.
find an enemy and start kind of trying to look for a kill. And this is for entries only, right? Start paying attention. I know that they might have a shotgun and play here, or they like to play this area, they like to play back here, and you can start looking for kills. The number one, that's the number one thing that you can do as an entry. Just kind of look for kills, play it slow. Number two is just kind of take space when they give it to you. Many times I've seen when Chamber was pretty good. You can actually just have Chamber just wait here, and then he could slowly take this space right here, and it's still viable. You can still do stuff like this with any character. Oh, they're not taking this space back. Well, I can just use it and maybe catch someone off guard, maybe by ladder, maybe over here. They're not paying attention in back sight, right? You can use a slower play style, more methodical play style to basically pick them off when they're not paying attention, or pick them off when they're having moments of just weakness because they're not really paying attention to where you are because you're playing slow. You don't have a wall, you don't have a smoke, nothing's telling them what's going to hit. Okay, you can use those moments to try to catch them off guard. The next question is what happens if they counter that? It's just a matter of just running it in. Okay, if they start countering that, you got to see what happens when you run it in. I always tell players, test it out. Okay, test it out, and if it doesn't work, continue playing it slow, because having no controller or no smokes is rough, especially on a map like this one. And pray they have a lever. That's all I'm going to say. All right, let's call it here. Thank you guys for coming. If you have any further questions, DM them to me. I'm going to post this class hopefully by tonight, if not tomorrow. We're going to have a class again on Thursday. It's going to be the VOD raffle, and we're going to have another class again on Friday. No, Friday's VOD raffle. Thursday might be on mid-rounding for any player that struggles with defense and needs a way to kind of figure out rotations or how to take space. Okay, stuff like that. So that's what is going to happen on Thursday and Friday. Okay, let's close it here. If you have any other questions and you don't want to DM them to me, put them on the YouTube channel. It'll get traffic. It'll be awesome. All right, see you guys on that one. Closing this off.